And why I'm asking this, probably in one of the earlier lectures where I was present, I suggested that probably for those students who are coming from the marginalized communities, especially from Maharashtra, for them there are certain icons which are very sentimentally attached to them. And Shivaji Maharaj's name is almost one of that sentimental attachment. That more than a historical figure or a part of the kind of a grand history, Shivaji Maharaj's name is almost like a part of your everyday cultural and social and ritualistic ethos, at least in Maharashtra. And therefore, when I was speaking on the JNU's old culture, I tried to suggest that probably when we come to campus like JNU, there was always this kind of an hesitation to, or some kind of a differentiation that we made, that probably those icons and those grand stalwarts that we were so sentimentally attached with, that space is not very much there. And therefore I suggested that for us, Jai Bhim is almost like an everyday staple food, at least in Maharashtra. The kind of cultural values from which we come, there is not much differentiation between Namaskar and Jai Bhim. But probably when we were students, probably at that part of time, this kind of slogans had that kind of an hesitation to have in everyday circle. And therefore probably when she asked me that I need to speak on Shivaji, I was basically thinking that that sentiment which was there in Maharashtra for such a long time, the Marathi public is, as I said, emotionally and sentimentally attached with this icon. And therefore it resounds almost everywhere, political, social, cultural, every aspect of Maharashtra's life. This name resonates or means you cannot simply avoid that. And therefore I thought that this is a very important suggestion. Why I was suggesting this? Like for that matter, a small story in our local folklore, that from where we got this name called Wankhede for that matter. So in our family history, there is a small story that my great-great-grandfather was a guard of a village called Vanavati near the Van river, and he was basically suggested that nobody should cross the village at night, and he was basically guarding the village. And he saw that at the midnight, a big troop of soldiers wanted to cross the village, and he suggested that no, you cannot cross. Why? Because it is I am responsible for guarding the village, and you should not simply overtake that particular rule. They suggested that it is of course an important mission that we need to carry forward, but he suggested no, I have a responsibility, I cannot allow you to cross the village. The head of that particular troop suggested, fine, we will stay and we will speak to your Sarpanch next time, and then after only we will cross. So whole night the troops stayed there. Early morning, as soon as the news reached to the head of the village, they all came rushing to that particular place and suggested that this is the troop of Shivaji Maharaj, and how dare you stall their travel. But the leader, it was suggested the leader was of course Shivaji Maharaj, and when he got to know that this is a person who is taking his duty so sincerely, knowingly that these are soldiers, and he came closer to that particular man, he hugged them and suggested that now, because you are such a righteous person, you are required for our army and you should join us, and the name of the village will be given to you, and you will be part of the new revolutionary force. So that kind of stories are there. As I said that when Aisha was asking me that what should be the topic of this particular event today, I thought that at least in Maharashtra we called Shivaji not as a king but something called people's king, or what they call Rayatecha Raja. Rayatecha Raja means like the people's king. And therefore the idea of people becomes so crucial for all of us. Why this idea is crucial? Because you just see the context in which Shivaji was basically making history. 17th century was the time when probably the idea of people was almost absent. the idea of a ruler, mainly in the medieval times, was mainly about an imperial feudal lord who will basically use the force to expand their boundaries and gather much of the land. That was the idea of a king. Shivaji enters into that domain and suggests that probably this idea requires a newer change. The idea of empire requires a newer change. And he was speaking, of course, in 17th century, when probably mainly in Europe or in other developed world, that idea was there that the state required some kind of a sensitivity or responsibility towards people. That idea was there probably in Hobbes' writing, or even for that matter Machiavelli's writing, that idea that state should be responsible towards people. That idea was there in Western Europe, but probably not in India. And therefore this particular person, when he emerges in that particular location, suggesting that a commoner, a normal young boy can dream and desire about becoming a king and founding an empire on that particular aspect, and that empire will not be based upon this imperialist aspirations or desire, but to serve the people. This idea of serving the people was very, very important. That basically emerged at that part of time, that kings are somewhere need to have a relationship with the people. That idea, that people-centric kingdom in 17th century, probably that was some kind of a newer opening that Shivaji Maharaj was doing at that part of time, and that's why it was very crucial. And therefore probably we need to go back into that kind of historical logic under which Shivaji was seen as a great leader or great king. This idea of greatness is often attached to people like Akbar or Ashoka, and in probably that lineage, or Chalukyas or Cholas in South. Probably in that lineage, one needs to acknowledge Shivaji Maharaj's contribution, that he is the first probably king in the North Indian circle where the centrality of people, their rights, their protection becomes so crucial. Not only that, probably multiple other modern values that we now sincerely acknowledge and think that these values are crucial for building a modern secular nation state. The idea of republicanism, for that matter. Republicanism is an idea in which we decide that people should choose their king, their ruler. The state should be elected by the people. The people's participation is very important. And therefore, probably in that kind of a model which Shivaji Maharaj was building at that part of time, which was basically connected to the commoners, that it is not an exclusive kind of a junta of soldiers which will be responsible for guarding the king and the kingdom, but the commoners should join the king. The commoners should be part of the army. The commoners should also part of the larger kingdom making process. That idea that it is basically people's participation that will decide the idea of the new state, that republican value was very much there in Shivaji Maharaj's that overall approach. And therefore many other ideas, like for that matter, the idea of secularism, that king will not be just responsible for protecting the Varnashrama dharma, but protecting the general people. And in that people, of course, the Krishi Palak, the idea of Krishi Palak means those farming community, the poor, the landless, the Dalits and the Adivas. This idea that the king has a responsibility towards the vulnerable communities, and therefore probably the idea of a state is responsible towards social justice. This idea was somewhere evoked or manufactured or somewhere crafted during Shivaji Maharaj's time, that responsibility of the state is towards the vulnerable communities, vulnerable people, marginalized communities, and their participation in the larger making of the nation is very, very crucial. And therefore, this idea further that the land holding will be somewhere socialist in nature, that it is the responsibility of the state to understand that the farming communities will be protected and their rights will be protected. This idea that somewhere the responsibility of the state policy is towards the people, mainly the farming communities. And through that probably somewhere a simple idea called socialism, that the state will take over most of the public assets and distribute among the needy and the working classes. So somewhere even these modern ideas, socialism, social justice, secularism, republicanism, which we think that we are borrowing from the West. Probably in Indian history, we can suggest or we can argue that somewhere there was a regime, there was a time when this idea was were progressively implemented, try to make meaning of that. As I said, that even the value of secularism, and many those who have watched any old film, not the new telecasts that are there on Shivaji, on multiple channels, but if you see the old film, you will find that Shivaji's portrait, Shivaji Maharaj's portrait is mainly about protecting the good people. And those good people are not only the Hindus or lower caste or farming communities, but also the Muslims. And that idea that he will not, what is called, he will not tolerate anything which is communal in nature. Okay? And that's why the Hinduist Swaraj will not be against the Muslims, but also protecting the vulnerable sections among the Muslims. That idea, and the state must perform that role. That idea of Shivaji was, of course, very, very crucial. And therefore, these modern ideas, if you wanted to kind of have some genesis or some kind of a linkage from our historical past, probably we need to go back to this kind of histories where certain rulers and certain kings, of course, they were not typically democratic, they were not completely what you call modern in every aspect of their life, but there is some kind of essence available around these ideas, and therefore probably going back to the history and looking that from where we can borrow some kind of resonance about these ideas, probably Shivaji's life or Shivaji's history becomes very, very important and crucial. And therefore probably when we entered into campuses like JNU and feel that somewhere there is some kind of a distancing from our history and the kind of history projects that are there in modern or institutions or these big campuses, of course there is some kind of a hesitation to accept whether this is right or wrong. And therefore probably now when we know that ideal king, that great ruler, that person who was sincerely modern in his approach, modern in a value sense, is now been furnished or targeted or even kind of portrayed as a Hindu king who is a kind of a butcher of the Muslims. That kind of a stereotype or a value which is generated with the BJP within the current regime, mainly as she was also suggesting within the right-wing political formation, this kind of a larger stereotype which is connected to Shivaji Maharaj today. Of course, that is the time where we have to kind of resurrect. We need to argue that this portrayal is very, very dangerous and difficult. And therefore, probably reading and understanding Shivaji Maharaj and this crucial time is very, very, very important. Probably we are a little late into entering that debate. The left or even the Bahujan movement is little late to what they call examining and appropriating these historical figures in our social and political battles. The right wing is smart and probably they are absolutely Machiavellian in their approach when they are dealing with the past. And therefore, this is the kind of a new learning that we need to understand. That probably when we look into the past, when we look into our history, there is a requirement to understand that there are facilities, there are icons, there are chapters, there are historical events available which we can utilize to mobilize the large chunk of people, and that connection probably for a very, very long time we have lost and of course exploited by the right wing in a very, very dangerous and sincere manner, and therefore the battle becomes very, very, very important in today's time. The way history has been manipulated, the way icons or legends or the great leaders of the past were almost communalized and suggested that they are basically part of what they call the great Hindu civilization, and those secular motives, those motives which are basically suggest that they were extremely sincere vis-a-vis the idea of justice, mainly social justice. They were revolutionary in their own manner. That idea is now collapsing, and therefore probably this kind of events at least. I'm very thankful that JNUSU thought that we should have a sincere talk or deliberation on such an important topic. It is very important. And in that case, probably the way, at least in Maharashtra's socio-cultural political sphere, mainly the Dalit Bahujan and even the rest, and therefore Govind Pansare's name is extremely important. Why? Because he understood at that part of time that the way the regional political outfit, mainly Shiv Sena at the beginning, and later the RSS and the BJP is basically molding the figure of Shivaji in a communal attire. So he understood that, and therefore that book is such a wonderful work. Suggesting that somewhere you need to look into the past with some kind of concern with justice. What do you mean by justice? What do you mean by nation building process? What do you mean by class struggle, or what do you mean by the marginalized communities' arrival into designing the state or the nation? So that ideas are such wonderfully put in that book, and making the figure look like a normal human being, not just a godly figure, but a normal human being with such kind of heroic capacity, and can turn the history for the larger welfare of the people. That idea is there in Pansare's work. And again, if you read Phule's Poada on Shivaji Maharaj, again, as I said, Raitecha Raja. Raitecha Raja means people's king. That idea that rulers should be sincerely connected and attached to the concerns and values of the people, and their welfare should be the prime responsibility of the ruling class. That idea is there in Phule's Poada, and I think we need to go back to those historical resources, suggesting that our history had these revolutionary, progressive values which are now required to come back into the mainstream and challenge the current establishment, that the way they are appropriating not only Shivaji Maharaj but many other legends, including Baba Saheb Ambedkar, the way they are appropriating, they are maligning, the way they are communalizing their portrait or their heroism. I think there is a need to check that portrayal. There is a need to understand that this is a kind of Machiavellian ideological project under which the progressive values of our nation are now tarnished and challenged and changed. I think this kind of efforts are required. More reading of Shivaji Maharaj's work is required. More engagement on the historical resources that are available to all of us. More engagement is required on that, and probably this kind of meetings will surely help us to make better sense of our future and of the past. Thank you very much that you invited me.